My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 29 years old when I received the message that finally broke the illusion I had worked so hard to protect. It was an early December afternoon, just cold enough to sting, and I was halfway through wrapping a gift for my assistant when my phone buzzed. It was from my mother. Christmas dinner at the cabin starts at 4 p.m. Lisa's bringing her green bean casserole. Don't forget to bring something. Lisa, my ex. The same Lisa I had loved for 5 years. The same Lisa who had spent birthdays and Thanksgivings with my family. Who had laughed with my sister over inside jokes. And cried with my mother when her own dog died. The same Lisa who had, just 2 months prior, walked out of our shared apartment without a backward glance. I blinked at the message, waiting for a second one, an explanation, a check-in. Are you okay with her being there? Nothing came, just the unspoken assumption that Lisa belonged more than I did. So I sent my mother a separate message. So Lisa's coming. Her reply was instant. Of course, she's family. You can come too, as long as you don't make things awkward. My breath caught, not in sadness, in something colder, sharper, clarity. That message wasn't just about Lisa. It was about me, and how easily I could be replaced. How I was seen as the optional one. The girl who had always been too quiet, too understanding, too easy to set aside. And suddenly, all the little things clicked into place. The times they praised Lisa's cooking while ignoring my promotion. The way my sister, Hannah, posted a photo of her and Lisa grabbing coffee just a week after the breakup, captioned "my favorite person." The birthday text I never got. I'd excused it all. I told myself it was transitional, that it was awkward for them, too. But now they weren't awkward. They were comfortable handing over my place in the family to the woman who had left me. And that, more than the heartbreak, more than the silence, was what burned. I typed the words carefully. Like cutting thread with a scalpel, I'd rather freeze alone than pretend this is family. And I meant it. What they didn't know, what no one seemed to remember, was that Christmas wouldn't be happening at my mother's house this year. It would be at my grandfather's cabin. The same one he left to me in his will 3 years ago. The same one everyone assumed still belonged to my mom. They had used it every holiday since his passing. I let them. I didn't say a word. I stayed quiet, because that's what I'd always done. I didn't remind them who held the deed, or who paid the property taxes. I let them have their traditions, their turkey in the big oven, their snow-covered Instagram memories. But this year was different. This year, they had made it clear I wasn't one of them. And if I wasn't part of the family, then they didn't get to keep using what was mine. That night, I pulled out the paperwork from the drawer I rarely opened, the one with my grandfather's last note, still creased from being read too often. He hadn't been a sentimental man, but when he left me the cabin, he wrote, "You were the only one who ever listened." I called Jeff, the old caretaker Grandpa had trusted for over a decade. "Hey, Jeff," I said, "I need a favor. Lock the place up. No one gets in without my permission." There was a pause. Even your mom. Especially her. He didn't ask questions. Jeff never did. By morning, the locks were changed. I signed updated security paperwork and activated a smart camera system that sent alerts directly to my phone. Meanwhile, the family group chat buzzed with dessert assignments and weather predictions. My mom posted in all caps, "Can't wait for Christmas at the cabin." I didn't respond. Christmas Eve arrived like a well-dressed stranger, cold and composed. I watched the first alert pop up on my phone at 1:12 p.m. My aunt's SUV pulling into the snow-covered driveway. 3 minutes later, another alert, my cousin's truck, full of gifts and pies. Then a message from my aunt, "Hey. Weird thing. The keys don't work. Jeff isn't answering. Do you have a spare?" I ignored it. Then came another. "Is there a new lock? Did something happen?" And finally, From my mother, Jeff says we need your permission to enter the cabin. What's going on? I replied with the same detachment one might use when reading a weather report. It's my cabin. Silence. Then chaos. Calls, texts, more messages. This isn't funny. Rachel, where are the new keys? The turkey's in the car. I watched it all from the comfort of my small apartment, wrapped in a flannel blanket, sipping cider by a tabletop tree. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about remembrance. I wanted them to remember that I existed, that I mattered, that my silence wasn't consent, and my generosity wasn't a given. By sundown, the temperature had dropped to 16 degrees. The kids were crying. The adults were scrambling. Someone tried to start a fire pit, but forgot to bring matches. The group chat, once full of emojis and exclamation points, was now a graveyard of read receipts and unanswered pleas. Then came the call. Not a text, a real call, from my Aunt Linda. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "just tell us what you want." I paused, for the first time in years. They weren't telling me. They were asking, and I held the answer like a delicate weight in my chest, unsure whether to drop it or place it down gently. "I want to not be the villain for having boundaries," I said slowly. "I want to not have to beg for a place that should have already been mine. I want someone to say, 'We were wrong.'" She was quiet. Then she whispered Lisa made it easy to keep things light. "You got quiet. We didn't know what to do." "That's the thing," I said. "You confuse silence with permission." I let that linger. Then she asked, "If we fix this, really fix this, will you come back?" I closed my eyes, thought of the cabin, the empty tree, the turkey congealing in someone's back seat. "Not this year," I said. "Maybe next. If you remember me before you remember the casserole." And that's when I hung up calmly, without malice, because for the first time in years, I had nothing left to prove. And they had everything to sit with the morning after the cabin debacle arrived, quieter than I expected. No clamor of wrapping paper, no scent of cinnamon rolls baking, just me, Rachel Morgan, seated cross-legged in my living room, eating leftover lo mein in flannel pajamas. There was no tree lit with ornaments, no stockings on the wall, and yet, oddly enough, it felt honest, not festive, but real. At 9:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. A photo from my cousin Julia, 3 toddlers bundled in winter coats, huddled indoors beside a tiny space heater. Behind them, a folding table stood awkwardly under the kitchen light of someone's suburban garage, decorated hastily with dollar store tinsel. They were trying, they were improvising, they were uncomfortable. I didn't reply. By 9:47, Hannah, my older sister, sent a message. A blurry picture of potatoes roasting unevenly in a toaster oven with the caption, "You win. Mom's crying." I stared at it for a full minute, not because of the content, but the tone. It was the first time in years that Hannah didn't sound smug or dismissive, just tired, human. The version of her I barely remembered from our shared childhood bedroom, when she used to sneak me candy under the covers. And still I said nothing. Because what could I say that wouldn't be taken the wrong way if I answered too fast? I'd be melodramatic. If I didn't respond, I was cruel. So I did what I'd always done. I let time speak for me. At 11:24 a.m., Lisa texted me. "I didn't mean to come between you and them. I just didn't think they'd choose me over you." That stopped me. Not because it hurt, but because it was honest. The first thing Lisa had said since October that didn't come wrapped in therapy speak or subtle blame. And that made it sting in a different way. Because she was right. They had chosen her. Not maliciously, not with banners and declarations, but quietly, casually, and that, in many ways, was worse. It's easy to be angry at someone who stabs you, It's harder when they hand the knife to someone else and look away. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I assumed it was a neighbor, or maybe a delivery. But when I opened it, Hannah was standing there, snow clinging to her coat sleeves, holding a paper bag of cookies that looked suspiciously store-bought. Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, she looked 5 Christmases younger. "Hey," she said, I told them I was going to the store. I needed air." I stepped aside, without a word, and she walked in like someone stepping onto foreign ground. She perched on the edge of my couch, like it might collapse under guilt. "I shouldn't have gone along with it," she said quietly. "I saw it happening. I just didn't want to be in the middle." "That's the thing," I said, settling into my armchair. "You weren't in the middle. You were on the side, just not mine." She flinched a little, then nodded. "Mom's not okay," she continued after a pause. "She's crying. She says she didn't think you'd actually stay away." "That's the problem," I replied. "She thought I'd always bend." Hannah looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to recognize something she forgot I had resolve. "Do you want to come back next year?" she asked after a while, almost in a whisper. I stared at the half-empty cider mug on the table, then back at her. "Will my seat still be there?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then finally, she said, "It's yours. Always was. We just forgot how to show it." That hit harder than I expected, because somewhere deep down, even after everything, I had wanted to believe that maybe I wasn't the ghost I had been made to feel like. We sat in silence for a while, just 2 women with too much history and too little language to untangle it all in one sitting. When she left, she didn't hug me. She just looked at me like someone who finally saw a reflection she'd ignored in her own mirror for too long. That winter moved slower than most. I didn't answer as many texts. I stopped being the first to like family photos. I unsubscribed from the role of family glue that no one asked for, but everyone expected. And no one dragged me back. Lisa, as predicted, faded from the narrative, quietly, like smoke dispersing in wind, by spring. There were no more Sunday brunch selfies with her and my mom. No tags, no comments under her wellness podcast posts. She hadn't been removed. She'd simply been allowed to drift, the same way she had once drifted into my place at the table. But now, that place was deliberately left open. By the time summer faded into fall again, the family group chat started stirring with new energy. Not the passive who's bringing pie kind of energy, but real, cautious check-ins, messages that didn't assume, invitations that didn't demand. And then, in early December, my mother sent me something different. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotionally manipulative. It wasn't even long. Just a simple message: "I miss you. If you choose to come back. Your place is waiting. No conditions." I stared at that message for over an hour. Not because I didn't believe it, but because, for the first time, it didn't feel like bait. It felt like acknowledgement. No mention of Lisa. No defensiveness. No performative apologies. Just truth. And I sat with that truth. Because healing doesn't demand speed. It demands honesty. And this year, I finally had both. The snow came early that December, thick, unapologetic, and quiet in a way that demanded presence. I watched it coat the city from the bay window of my apartment, curled up in the same chair I'd claimed during that frozen Christmas last year. The world had changed since then, in small, deliberate shifts, but not as much as I had. For once, I wasn't rushing toward reconciliation. I wasn't rehearsing lines for how to explain my boundaries without making people uncomfortable. I wasn't calculating what would earn me acceptance. I was simply living, and that was enough. A week before Christmas, I received a box from my mother. It was unannounced, wrapped in brown paper and careful handwriting. Inside was a collection of old family ornaments. Some I recognized from childhood, the wooden reindeer I painted with Hannah when I was 6. The cracked snowflake Mom had once declared too sentimental to toss. At the bottom, carefully wrapped in tissue, was one I had never seen before, a small pine disc, engraved with my name and the year I was born. There was no note, just the ornament, and all the things it didn't need to say. And still, I didn't respond, not immediately. Because forgiveness, like healing, isn't a transaction. It's a return to self, and mine had been out on loan for far too long. But I did do something else. I packed a bag. I loaded my car with firewood, cider, and a tin of my grandmother's cookie recipe I had baked myself. I drove slowly upstate through winding roads and snow-kissed pine forests until the trees grew taller than the skyline ever could. The cabin stood just as I remembered it, stoic, simple, patient. Jeff had cleared the path. The key slid into the new lock with an ease that felt earned. Inside, it was cold at first, the kind of cold that sits in your bones like old memory. I lit the fireplace, unwrapped the ornaments, and quietly decorated a small tree in the corner. No one knew I was there yet, and I liked it that way. Because this wasn't a grand return. It wasn't a show of mercy or pride. It was simply me, reclaiming space I had always belonged to but had long stopped feeling worthy of. The next morning, I texted my mother, not a paragraph, not a preamble, just one line: I'll be at the cabin. If anyone wants to come, they're welcome, but only if they're coming for me, not out of guilt. No reply, not for hours. I made tea. I watched snow drift against the window. I built a fire and read a book I hadn't made time for in years. By evening, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway, then more, and more. They came slowly, not in a parade but a procession. Hannah's car, my cousin Julia's, even Aunt Linda's beat-up minivan, wobbling slightly as it hit the patch of black ice near the mailbox, but not Lisa's. One by one, they entered without fanfare, without assumptions. My mother stood just inside the door, holding the same paper bag of cider packets I'd once brought to her every year. She looked older, softer. Her smile was hesitant, not forced. Her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this okay?" she asked. I nodded once. And that was enough? There were no loud apologies, no awkward speeches, just quiet acts of repair. My sister sweeping pine needles I hadn't noticed. My cousin setting the table without asking who was supposed to. My aunt refilling mugs with cider before anyone ran out. And then, the moment. Dinner was ready. The table was full. The air was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fireplace. My mother reached into the drawer, pulled out the carving knife, and handed it to me wordlessly. Not as a gesture of control, but as a recognition that this was still my table, my place, my story. I looked around. No one was pretending nothing happened. No one tried to gloss over last year. They simply made space for what was, and that's what made it real. I carved the turkey with a calm hand. My mother set the first slice on my plate, eyes glossy. Hannah squeezed my arm under the table. There was no grand toast, just a silent understanding echoing across clinking glasses and passing dishes. We were still fractured, but not broken. And in that moment, I understood something I had once been too hurt to see, that sometimes healing doesn't mean going back to what was. It means creating something new, something honest on top of the ashes. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep and the cabin had returned to its quiet hum, I sat alone by the fire, holding the pine disc ornament in my palm. I didn't cry, but I did smile. Because this time, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was peace. It had been a long time since I fell asleep without the weight of wondering who I was to my family. But that night in the cabin, surrounded by creaky floorboards, faint pine sap in the walls, and a fire that crackled like it knew my name, I slept deeply, not out of exhaustion, but out of quiet assurance. For once, I didn't have to defend my worth in the very house that was left to me as proof of it. The next morning, I was the first to wake. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, letting the cold floor wake me fully, and started the coffee through the frosted window. I could see deer tracks in the snow, peaceful, undisturbed. I wondered, briefly, if my grandfather would have smiled at how things unfolded, his granddaughter finally standing up, not just for herself, but for the space he always knew she deserved. The quiet didn't last long. One by one, my family emerged from sleeping bags and couches, rubbing eyes, offering soft mornings like prayer. There was no rush to make breakfast, no performative frenzy to impress one another, just presence. And for this family, that was progress. Hannah sat beside me at the kitchen island, nursing a mug of black coffee, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said, voice gravelly with sleep, "for a long time I thought you were just dramatic, always the one getting your feelings hurt. I didn't get it." I glanced at her, unsure if this was going somewhere constructive. "But now," she continued, "I realize you were just the only one who noticed the water boiling before the rest of us got burned. That took me off guard. I wasn't trying to make everything about me," I said softly. "I just couldn't keep pretending things were okay when they weren't." "I know," she nodded, "and I'm sorry for not saying something sooner, for watching you get erased and calling it keeping the peace. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but we sat in that truth, side by side, and that was more healing than 1,000 apologies." Later that afternoon, we took a walk down to the frozen lake. My mom wore the same coat she'd worn the Christmas after Dad left. She moved slower now, more fragile, like years of trying to hold everyone together had hollowed something in her. She reached for my arm, not because she needed support, but because she needed closeness. And that was new. "I don't think I ever told you why we kept inviting Lisa," she said, breath turning white in the air. "At first, it was just habit. You were still part of us, and we figured she was too. Then, she kept showing up, offering to help, checking in. It felt easier than dealing with the hole you left." I didn't answer right away. The ice beneath our feet groaned faintly, as if reacting. "It wasn't that I didn't miss you," she added. "It's just that Lisa made it convenient not to." That stung, but it was real. It wasn't her presence that hurt me. I finally said, "It was your acceptance of her in place of me, like I could be replaced. As long as someone brought a casserole and remembered your birthday." She stopped walking. "I know, and I hate that it took locking us out for me to really hear you." I turned to her, leveling my voice. "I didn't lock you out to punish anyone. I did it because no one remembered it was mine. The house, the pain, the place. Everyone acted like I was just a guest." "You were never a guest," she whispered. "But you made me feel like one," I said, and for once, she didn't argue. That evening, dinner was quieter, more intimate. No Lisa, no awkward glances, just those who had decided to show up for me, not out of tradition, but choice. Julia, my cousin, was washing dishes when she suddenly turned to me. "You always were the one holding everything together, you know," she said. "We just never noticed until you stopped." I let out a short laugh. "Isn't that always the way?" She nodded. "But we see it now. You shouldn't have had to set the house on fire to get us to feel the cold." Those words stayed with me. After dinner, my aunt handed me an envelope. no name, no decoration. Inside was a letter not typed, not poetic, just a simple acknowledgement. We see you now. Thank you for not disappearing. For years, I had believed that distance was the only way to reclaim myself. And maybe, for a while, it was. But this quiet recognition, this willingness to be uncomfortable together, that was the real healing. It wasn't perfect. There were still fractures. But now they were visible, named, no longer swept beneath the holiday tablecloth. As night fell and laughter filled the cabin, again lighter this time, less performative, I slipped away outside. The air bit at my skin, but it felt earned. I looked up at the cabin, the soft glow from the window spilling across the snow, and I knew this wasn't just my inheritance. It was my boundary, my memory, my reckoning. And they finally saw it. But what came next would challenge what they thought they'd already learned. The rest of the holiday passed without grand revelations or dramatic speeches. And somehow, that made it better. Healing doesn't always need fireworks. It needs consistency, small gestures that, over time, rebuild the broken scaffolding of trust. When everyone left the cabin that year, they didn't say, "See you next Christmas." They said, "Let's keep trying." And I believed them cautiously. But honestly, winter faded into spring. I stayed in the city, tending to the small life I had built for myself, brick by quiet brick. I didn't rush back into the group chats. I didn't leap at every family birthday or weekend brunch. I waited. I observed. I let them earn it not through guilt, but through presence. And to their credit, they did, one by one. Hannah came by my apartment one rainy March evening. No announcement. She brought takeout and a box of old photos from our childhood. Unprompted. "I thought we could make a scrapbook," she said casually, like she hadn't ignored my existence for an entire year. But I knew what she was really saying. I'm still here. I still want this. We spent hours piecing memories together, some too frayed to recognize, others as sharp as glass. Somewhere between a crooked kindergarten photo and a summer beach trip where our hair was stiff with salt, she asked, "Do you ever think we just didn't know how to love you right?" I stared at the photo in my hand. "No," I said, "I think you loved me in the way you understood love. It just wasn't the way I needed it." By summer, even my mother had begun to show up differently. Fewer unsolicited advice texts. More, just thinking of you messages. Sometimes with photos of her garden or my niece's crayon drawings. No pressure, no conditions, just breadcrumbs toward connection. But it wasn't until Thanksgiving that I realized how much things had shifted. The group chat started early that year, and for the first time, it didn't assume anything. No one assigned dishes. No one planned anything at my mom's. Instead, Hannah sent a message. "Would you be okay if we came to the cabin again? Only if you want to host. If not, no pressure." I sat with that message for a long time. Not because I didn't know my answer, but because I wanted to honor what it meant that she had asked. Eventually, I replied, "Yes, but we do it differently this time." We did. Thanksgiving came with more helping hands and fewer expectations. People brought their own chairs, cooked their own sides, helped clean before I asked. My cousin even repaired the loose stairboard that had driven me nuts for years. There were fewer jokes at my expense, more questions about how I was. No one mentioned Lisa, not once. She had drifted fully out of their orbit, and for once, I didn't feel like the one who had to orbit around their comfort. My mother, always the reluctant matriarch, stood in the corner during dinner and said softly, "This is what I always wanted. I just didn't know how to get here without hurting you first." I met her gaze across the room. Sometimes things need to break to be rebuilt the right way. She nodded. Thank you for not staying broken. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I found something tucked inside my coat pocket, a small card from my aunt. On it, in her cursive that always looped a little too high, it read, "Thank you for freezing the moment long enough for us to see what we became. You gave us the gift of perspective, even when we didn't deserve it." I cried not because it hurt, but because it didn't anymore. That Christmas, I didn't wait for their invitation. I made one. Not a test, not a trap, a real invitation. I wrote it by hand, one for each of them. No mention of last year, just a new beginning. The cabin filled again, not with noise, but with care. Jeff, the caretaker, even joined us for dessert. Said it was the first Christmas he'd attended in 15 years. Felt like the kind of place I wouldn't mind being. He shrugged. And it was the biggest difference. They didn't center themselves in my presence anymore. They didn't rush to over-apologize or overcompensate. They let the space be what it was, mine. After dinner, my niece climbed into my lap and asked, "Is this your house forever?" I smiled. It's everyone's when we treat each other like we belong. She nodded like she understood more than she should. And maybe she did. Because the truth is, I hadn't just taken back a cabin. I had reclaimed something much harder to hold my voice. My boundaries. My seat at the table. Not the physical one, but the one built on acknowledgement, not obligation. And the final twist. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about being remembered, not for what I had lost, but for what I had held on to long enough to help others finally understand. That year, they didn't toast to tradition. They toasted to change. And for once, I lifted my glass not as a guest, not as the one who stirred conflict, but as someone whose presence no longer came with conditions. I was home. And this time, they didn't forget who opened the door. Story 2. My name is Rachel Ellis. I'm 34, and last Thanksgiving I learned exactly how expendable I was in my own family. It wasn't a revelation that came softly or with nuance. It hit like a slap, wrapped in linen napkins and faux laughter. In a fine dining restaurant I couldn't afford. I wasn't expecting warmth, but I wasn't expecting exile either. Kyle, my older brother and family golden boy, had organized the dinner, booking a high-end place in downtown Seattle with white tablecloths, Wagyu sliders, and wine I couldn't pronounce. Everyone showed up. My parents, both sisters and their plus ones. Kyle's new fiancé, even my mom's distant cousin who once lived in an ashram. Everyone had a seat except me. The only chair left was a fold-out shoved near a trash bin. Not part of the pristine table arrangement. "Sorry," Kyle said, smirking. "This table's for family only." His voice was just loud enough, his tone casual enough to be brushed off as a joke. But it wasn't. Not really. My mom looked away. My dad pretended to check his phone. No one stopped him. So I sat in that corner, silent. My overpriced Caesar salad wilting, while my niece spilled grape juice on linen. I made a game of counting how many times she'd do it before someone told her to stop. The answer was 4. When the check came $3,200 in total, the waiter set it in front of Kyle. He paled, briefly, before sliding it to me with a smile. "Split it. Fair's fair." I stared at the breakdown. Bottles of wine I never touched. Wagyu I didn't eat. A dessert tower I didn't even see. The waiter, sensing the tension, lingered. I leaned back, gestured toward the main table, and said clearly, "Not my table," for a heartbeat. Silence. Then I stood up, walked out, and let the cold November air slap my face back to life. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. As I walked, my phone buzzed like it was possessed. My mother's voicemail. My sister's text. Kyle's caps locked seriously. Even Dad had written, "Call me." No punctuation. Always worse that way. But I didn't call. I turned my phone off and stopped for a milkshake instead. By the time I got home, the family group chat had exploded. Aunt Patty had uploaded a screenshot of the bill to Facebook, captioned, "Some people don't understand what family means." Comments poured in like stormwater, judgmental, passive-aggressive, sanctimonious. Cousin Becca messaged me privately, "You legend." She wrote, "We've wanted to bail on that dinner for years." Apparently, after I left, Kyle threw a tantrum trying to force everyone else to split the bill. Dad ended up paying most of it while muttering about how no one respects tradition. Mom cried in the parking lot again. Meanwhile, I binge-watched Netflix with my dog, completely guilt-free, for once. 3 days passed. Silence. Then Becca sent a Venmo request, $20. "Petty fund, you earned it." I accepted. Saturday. I learned I'd been blacklisted from future family functions. Not officially. Of course. That would require actual confrontation. Something my family avoids like gluten. I found out the modern way I wasn't tagged in the brunch photo. Everyone else was there. Kyle gave a speech. His fiancée posted a caption that read, "Family is everything. Grateful for those who show up. Subtle. Real subtle." I zoomed in my chair. The fold-out by the trash. Wasn't in the frame. Guess it wasn't everything. Then came Emily, my youngest sister. "He deserved it." She texted, "Still mad he used my honeymoon to pitch his crypto startup." The tide was turning. I wasn't exiled. I was just the first to stand up. And then, Kyle showed up, not digitally. Not passive-aggressively, he rang my doorbell in person. I was in sweatpants, eating cereal out of a chipped mug. When I heard the doorbell, I didn't expect anyone, especially not him. Kyle stood there in designer sunglasses, arms crossed, like he was about to repo a car he didn't own. His posture screamed power play, but the tightness around his jaw told another story. I opened the door slowly, leaned against the frame. "Didn't recognize you without the entourage," I said. No smile, just facts. He stepped inside without asking, brushing past me like he belonged here. He didn't. The walls of my apartment were quiet witnesses to a life I'd built alone. No granite countertops, no curated Instagram corners, no vision board quotes in gold foil. Just me, and the dog hair he tried to ignore on the armrest as he perched on my couch like a king stripped of his court. I wanted to clear the air. He began, tone rehearsed, like a PR statement trying to get ahead of a scandal. Things got dramatic. I think there were misunderstandings. I didn't respond. I let the silence do the talking. "It was a joke. The seat thing," he added. "You always take things so seriously." My fingers tightened around the mug. Everyone laughed. He offered weakly. They laughed because they were afraid not to. That hit him harder than he let on. He shifted, scanned my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. No display of wealth, no trophies, just proof of quiet survival. "Mom's upset," he continued. "She says you're tearing the family apart." I raised an eyebrow. Not the guy who said I wasn't family. A pause. "She thinks we should move past this. Make amends." I nodded slowly. "Cool. You start. Apologize for publicly humiliating me. Then maybe we'll talk." He frowned. "I'm willing to forgive you," he said with such misplaced confidence it made me laugh real. Ugly laugh. The kind that gets stuck in your throat before it bursts out. "Forgive me," I repeated, incredulous. "For what? Not paying for your champagne tower, not applauding your latest flex." He stood, flushed now. "You always do this. Act like you're better because you're not chasing money." My voice dropped. "Calmer now. No. I just don't expect other people to foot the bill when I do." He had no reply. He left without another word. No dramatic exit line. No door slam, just the soft whoosh of my door closing behind him. And the faint trail of that cologne he always wore like a business card. That night, Becca sent me a screenshot of Kyle's latest post, a vague, self-pitying quote graphic over a photo of him in a rental Tesla. The caption, "Some people weaponize victimhood to go viral. I stay booked." The comments roasted him alive. Someone even quoted me, "Not my table, not my Tesla either." For once, I didn't need to clap back. The internet did it for me. The family drama might have stayed confined to group chats and passive-aggressive memes, if not for Emily. 2 days later, she posted a TikTok, just her, holding a glass of cheap champagne, captioned, "Still not my table, still my boundaries." It hit 75K views in 12 hours. Becca stitched it with a snarky duet. "Tell me your family's toxic without telling me your family's toxic." The algorithm loved it. Comment sections flooded with similar stories, people banished to the kids' table in their 30s, disinvited for dyeing their hair blue, guilt-tripped for not footing $900 brunch tabs. We had touched a nerve, something raw, deeply familiar, and for once, I wasn't alone in it. By the weekend, our private chat had been renamed Pilgrim's Rebellion. It was Emily, Becca, Drew who popped in with a yo. Kyle still owes me $40 from Vegas, and a few extended cousins who'd silently resented Kyle for years. We didn't plot revenge, not exactly, but there was power in shared resentment. And finally speaking aloud what had simmered for too long, what started as petty validation became something deeper, recognition, and a reclamation of self-worth. And then came the call that changed everything again. It wasn't from Kyle. It was from Mom. Her voice was tight, clipped, unfamiliar. "Did you post about Kyle on Reddit?" she asked. I blinked. What your aunt said someone from her church showed her a story online about a guy who humiliated his sister at Thanksgiving and tried to make her pay for everything. She says it's about Kyle. She says you're mocking the family. I exhaled slowly. "It's called storytelling," I said, "and I changed the names. You still called him Kyle." Silence. "Okay. But who wouldn't know that was Kyle?" She didn't laugh, didn't sigh, just that brittle pause that always came before she chose diplomacy over defense. "She says you're turning Thanksgiving into a circus." I almost choked. I turned it into a circus. I wasn't the one assigning seating like it was a wedding hosted by a narcissist. Nothing. No response. Just more silence. But silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes, silence is the sound of everything shifting quietly, but permanently. I didn't respond to my mother. Not immediately. Not even that night. I let her words sit there, suspended between us like so many unsaid truths that had gathered over decades. Because deep down, I knew what she really feared wasn't Reddit, or Aunt Patty's judgment, or even Kyle's bruised ego. It was the fact that someone, finally, had stopped playing the family game. I had broken the script. And breaking the script is the one thing people like my mother can't forgive. But I didn't break it out of spite. I broke it because I was done. Later that night, Emily sent me a link. It wasn't just our family watching the TikToks anymore. It was strangers, dozens of them, stitching, commenting, sharing their own stories. Got seated by the freezer at my sister's wedding. Had to pay for my dad's third wife's birthday dinner. Then got told I was too loud. It was a trend now. Not my table was spreading. What had started as a single clapback had become a quiet movement, a rebellion against the unspoken rules of family obligation. And somehow, I'd become a reluctant figurehead. But trends don't sit well with narcissists, especially when they're no longer the star of the narrative. Kyle posted again. This time, a video hair styled within an inch of its life. Blazer too sharp for a casual rant. "Some people thrive on attention," he said. looking directly at the camera like he was delivering a TED Talk from a rented living room. They twist stories, make themselves victims, then act surprised when they're held accountable. Me? I stay booked. I stay building. The comments were merciless. Is your building made of folding chairs? Someone asked. Another booked bro. You're giving customer service energy. Becca sent me the screenshots. We don't even have to do anything. He's unraveling. But while Kyle publicly spiraled, Mom quietly imploded. I could hear it in her next voicemail, controlled but shaky. I just wish we could go back to how things used to be. I nearly laughed. What used to be? The version where I was invisible, unless they needed help moving furniture or paying for Mom's dental work. The version where I was smiled at, but never heard. That version never worked. Not for me. So no, we weren't going back. Then came something unexpected. Emily's video hit 200,000 views. Local influencers picked it up. Some therapist on YouTube did a breakdown of toxic family roles in the Not My Table saga. Suddenly, we were being cited, our pain packaged as content, our boundaries dissected like case studies. A part of me was uneasy, but another part relieved, because for the first time, someone outside the family saw what I saw, and they didn't say I was too sensitive. They said, that was wrong. And in that crack of validation, something shifted. I started getting messages from people I barely remembered, old classmates, former coworkers. I saw your story. That was powerful. One wrote, I didn't know you had that kind of backbone. Respect. That one hit harder than I expected, because I didn't know I had that kind of backbone either. Until now. Then Becca dropped the biggest surprise yet, a screenshot from a new group chat she had formed called Thanksgiving Survivors. It wasn't just our rebellious little cluster anymore. It had grown. Cousins we hadn't seen since 2012. A second cousin once removed from Boise. Even someone married into the family who had once been told they laughed too loudly for church. They were all in. Becca joked we should get matching hoodies. I said I'd design the logo myself. And while we were building digital solidarity, Kyle was launching damage control. He posted a carousel of smiling brunch photos with captions like, grateful for real ones, and let the haters talk. But no one was tagging him anymore. The likes were drying up. Jillian, his fiancée, unfollowed half the family, including Emily. And then quietly, without announcement, she made her account private. Becca messaged, I think the engagement might be wobbling. I didn't respond, but I couldn't help but wonder. What happens to a person whose entire persona is built around being adored? Once the adoration fades, then came the real twist. Grandma's birthday, a mandatory, non-negotiable event. No restaurant this time, just folding tables in her backyard. Costco sheet cake, paper plates, lukewarm lemonade. I almost didn't go. The thought of seeing Kyle again, of being looped back into that warped family orbit, made my skin itch. But then Grandma called. Not texted. Called. You're coming, she said softly. I saved you a seat. Something in her voice told me this time would be different, or at least, that I'd be different when I showed up. The morning of Grandma's birthday arrived with a breeze, just cool enough to feel ceremonial. I chose a soft navy dress, simple flats, and wore my hair the way Grandma always liked, down. No fuss. I wasn't dressing for the family. I was dressing for the one person who never treated me like I was disposable. I drove up to her house in Ballard, the same house where we used to play tag in the yard and eat popsicles on the back steps. This time, there were no black tie waiters, no overpriced steaks, no seating charts, just rows of plastic folding tables, lawn chairs, and the gentle chaos of a real family gathering. For once, it felt like a celebration, not a stage. As I stepped out of my car, I spotted Emily waving me over from across the yard. She had on sneakers, her hair in a ponytail, and a quiet fire in her eyes. "We saved you a seat," she said. I smiled. "Let me guess. By the trash can." She shook her head. "Nope. Right next to Grandma." I paused, unsure if I heard her right. The head of the table, I looked over and saw the empty chair, clean, sturdy, right beside Grandma's floral cushion. A place of honor. I hadn't sat there since I was maybe 10. Back when I still believed family was something you earned your way into by being good enough. And now, decades later, it was waiting for me again. I walked over, heartbeat loud in my ears. Grandma caught my hand as I approached. "There you are," she whispered, her palm warm. "You always bring the best stories, even when they make Aunt Patty clutch her pearls." I sat down, still unsure if this was a setup, a trick, a test. But no one objected. No one sneered. Becca grinned from 3 chairs away and lifted her soda can in a silent toast. Drew nodded. Even Emily looked proud. And Kyle sat 3 seats down, on the outer edge of the table, sunglasses still on despite the cloud cover. His voice, once the loudest in the room, had quieted. His jokes landed with dull thuds. Jillian was nowhere in sight. No one asked about his startup. No one praised his hustle. No one seemed to care that he had once been the gravitational force around which all of us orbited. Because that force was gone, and in its place sat something quieter but stronger. A reckoning, a reset. Lunch was simple. Sandwiches, store-bought potato salad, pitchers of ginger ale sweating in the sun. But it was real. And when Grandma asked me to help slice the cake, I didn't hesitate. As I stood there with the plastic knife, Emily at my side, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Being excluded had given me freedom, but choosing when to return that gave me power. This wasn't a seat given out of pity. It was a recognition of everything I had endured, everything I had refused to become. Later, while collecting paper plates and used napkins, Becca leaned in and whispered, "You gonna write about this part too?" I shrugged. "Maybe. But it's kinda boring." "Right," she grinned. "Exactly. That's how you know it's real." As the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long over the yard, people began to drift out. Hugs were exchanged, folding chairs stacked, leftovers packed in foil. And yet, something had shifted permanently. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet rearrangement of the hierarchy. The table had been reset, and this time, I wasn't standing on the outside looking in. But I should have known peace doesn't last forever, especially not in families built on silence and performance. Because just as I was packing up to leave, Emily's phone buzzed. Her face changed. She turned to me and said, "You might want to see this." It was Kyle. Again. Emily handed me her phone, her lips pressed into a thin line. I took one look and felt my stomach dip. Kyle had just gone live on Instagram. Of course. The background was his apartment, polished and staged like a catalog. He sat on a couch with dramatic lighting, the kind people rent for influencer setups. In the frame was a stack of self-help books, a candle, and a small crystal pyramid I was pretty sure he bought last month during his alignment phase. He looked calm, polished, performative. "Hi, everyone," he began. "I just want to speak my truth. I've stayed silent out of respect, but sometimes silence becomes complicity." He paused for effect, breathing like he was on a wellness podcast. Some people have turned family into content. They've distorted events for clout. And while I love my family, I will not tolerate being villainized by those who are still stuck in the past. Emily swiped up to check the comments. Bad idea. They were already exploding. Some of his remaining followers offered support, but most were dragging him mercilessly. "You literally said your sister wasn't family at dinner." Bro, the folding chair was the villain, not you. Not Kyle turning boundaries into betrayal. And then someone wrote, "Not my table," Not your redemption arc either. Becca sent me that one directly. That's poetry. She captioned it. I didn't post anything in response. I didn't need to. The internet had done its job. Kyle's attempt to rebrand as a misunderstood prophet backfired. Again, this time worse because the audience was over it. They'd seen the same pattern too many times. First charm, then manipulation, then martyrdom. They weren't clapping anymore. The curtain had dropped, and Kyle was still performing. A week passed, quietly, for once. The group chat was filled with actual conversation memes, weekend plans, even photos of Grandma with a birthday card we'd all signed. No drama, no passive jabs. Emily joked we were in our post-Kyle healing era. Becca renamed the group one last time, The Real Table. It stuck. We sent each other TikToks about therapy, subtle boundary setting, and soft revenge stories that didn't involve yelling, just becoming someone unbothered, someone free. One rainy evening, I got a text from my dad. No punctuation. As usual, just saw the video, thought you were graceful at Grandma's. I stared at the message for a while. Not an apology, but maybe the closest he'd ever come. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Some messages aren't meant to be answered, just acknowledged. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't radically transform. There was no Hollywood ending, no parade, but little things shifted. I felt lighter walking into rooms I used to dread. I stopped minimizing my own presence. I redecorated my apartment not for Instagram, just for me. I put a chair by the window where the light hit right at 4 p.m., and every time I sat in it, I remembered that I didn't need anyone's permission to take up space. Emily kept making videos. She got invited to speak on a panel about digital boundaries and family toxicity. Becca started a newsletter, petty but principled. Even Drew started therapy and sent us the occasional unprompted update like, realized I've been copying Kyle's ego for 10 years. Oops. We didn't laugh at him. We said, same. Because healing, it turns out, isn't about grand gestures. It's about quietly, stubbornly, rewriting the rules. As for Kyle, he stopped posting for a while. Then he reappeared with a new bio redefining success. Founder, speaker, vision-driven. No mention of family, no captions about gratitude, just soft lighting and generic quotes. Jillian eventually unfollowed him. Rumor was she moved back to California. I never reached out. Neither did Emily. We figured if Kyle ever wanted to find his way back, the folding chair would still be there. Empty. Waiting. Not at the head of the table. Not by the trash can, just somewhere in the middle. Where real people sit. No thrones. No stages. Because sometimes, the real revenge isn't exclusion. It's inclusion on your own terms. No scripts, no shame. Just a seat that's earned by showing up, not by status. Not by noise, but by heart. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just have a seat at the table. I had one that finally felt like mine. Story 3. My name is Rachel Lawson. I'm 32 years old, and I was never supposed to be at that dinner. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. It was my younger brother Ethan's 25th birthday. And my parents, Carol and Frank Lawson, threw him a private celebration at Giancarlo's, a high-end Italian spot in downtown Portland, where asking for ranch dressing is a sin, and the wine list doesn't bother with prices. I wasn't on the guest list until 2 days before, when I got a half-hearted text from my mother. If you're free, you can come too. That was it. No call, no warmth. Just an afterthought of an invitation. Tossed to me like I was some distant acquaintance instead of her eldest child. And despite every bone in my body telling me to ignore it, I went. I went not because I wanted to be there, but because I was tired of giving them more ammunition to say I'd become distant, difficult, ungrateful. I dressed well, smiled politely, and showed up on time, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, Being present would earn me something acknowledgement. Decency, a sliver of basic respect, but I should have known better. The restaurant was dimly lit, dripping in expensive minimalism. Ethan sat at the center of the long mahogany table, beaming like a king presiding over his court. My mother was in full matriarch mode, fussing over him, laughing loudly, pouring wine like we were toasting the second coming of success. My father sat beside her, quietly pleased, only chiming in when the conversation centered on Ethan's new job or his recent trip to Aspen. I took the seat furthest from them, next to Aunt Cheryl, who kept asking if I was still working that computer job. I work in cybersecurity. I own my condo. I have no debt. But to them, I'm still the quiet one, the background sister, the one who never caused trouble, but also never quite shined. Ethan was their golden child, the high school quarterback, the frat president, the freshly minted financial consultant at a firm they loved to name drop. He walked on clouds and never once looked down to notice who was holding the ladder. I kept my composure through the appetizers, nodded through backhanded compliments, and made small talk with relatives who had never bothered to ask about my life. I thought I was doing okay, maybe even winning. In a way, until the moment my mother raised her glass and changed everything. To Ethan, she said, her voice bright and unbothered. Let's raise a glass to the child who actually matters. The laughter came instantly sharp, echoing through the table like a slap I wasn't supposed to feel. But I didn't flinch. I smiled, a practiced smile, the kind I had spent a lifetime perfecting. And then, slowly, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a sealed white envelope, and slid it across the table toward her. Then this must belong to him, I said, calmly, quietly. But it was enough to make the laughter stop dead. My mother blinked. What is this? I met her gaze. Go ahead, read it out loud. She opened the envelope with the same indifference she used to show toward my school awards and accomplishments. But the moment her eyes scanned the letter inside, her face drained of color. The letter was from my attorney, officially revoking her and my father's access to the guest suite in the house I owned, the suite they had treated like a personal summer getaway for the last 11 months. They'd redecorated it, hosted guests there, even changed the Wi-Fi password without telling me. They used it as a status symbol while pretending I was the ungrateful one. She looked up at me, stunned. Is this real? She whispered. I nodded. Effective immediately. Movers will call you Monday. The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan looked between us, confused. Wait, what is this? I stood up, picked up my coat, and smiled not with bitterness, not with fury, just with finality. You're right, Mom. Let's celebrate the child who actually matters. Then I walked out. The night air hit me hard, cool, sharp, a slap of clarity. I hadn't driven myself there, knowing I might need an escape. I walked 2 blocks to a small park, sat on a wooden bench beneath a flickering street lamp, and just breathed. My phone buzzed endlessly, but I ignored it. 15 minutes later, a single text lit up my screen. It was from my cousin Melissa. Holy hell. You really did it. Are you okay? I didn't answer. Not yet. Not because I wasn't okay, but because I finally was, for the first time in years. I had done something that wasn't about preserving peace. It was about protecting myself. But the story didn't end at that table, and what came next would test every boundary I had ever built. It wasn't just about the dinner. Not really. That moment was simply the culmination of something that had been festering beneath the surface for years, no decades. People keep asking me why I did what I did, why I brought legal paperwork to a birthday party, why I made a scene. But the truth is, I didn't create a scene. They did. I just decided not to play along anymore. I stopped clapping for a performance that had me written out of the script. See? This story isn't about a single insult in a restaurant. It's about a lifetime of being the second choice. The invisible daughter. The reliable backup plan when Ethan stumbled, and the background noise when he succeeded. I remember when I got my first real promotion. I was 29, working 12-hour days securing systems for a startup that was hemorrhaging data faster than it could write NDAs. When they finally recognized my work and handed me a team of my own, I was ecstatic. I bought a bottle of champagne, called my parents, and drove over to share the news. My mother answered the door in yoga pants, holding a bowl of salad. "That's nice, honey," she said after I told her. "But don't you think it's time to get your master's? Ethan's already planning his MBA? No congratulations, no pride, just another comparison, another subtle reminder that, in her eyes, I was always one step behind." It was the same tone she used when she praised Ethan for doing things I'd mastered years before, like getting his own apartment or filing his taxes. After that, I started pulling back in quiet ways. I stopped volunteering to help with family events, stopped bailing them out when they forgot passwords or needed help with the tech stuff, when they hinted that they wanted to downsize and asked if I could help them figure things out. I offered the guest suite in my home, not out of guilt, but out of kindness. I told myself it was temporary, that I was being generous, that maybe this time they would see me. But within months, they moved in like they owned the place. They redecorated. They had friends over without asking. They bragged to their church group about their second home in the city, as if I had gifted them a vacation property instead of extending a temporary kindness. I found out through Melissa that they hosted Ethan's birthday party there the previous year without even inviting me. That's when I started planning. I met with a lawyer, laid everything out. I documented dates, made it all legal. I changed the lease agreement, revoked access rights, and quietly prepped for the moment I would reclaim my space, my life. I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. And I needed a clear, indisputable line between me and them. Something that couldn't be smoothed over with another backhanded compliment or brushed aside as just a joke. So I waited. I waited for the moment when they would prove, publicly and without doubt, that I didn't matter. And when my mother stood up and toasted Ethan as the child who actually matters, I knew it had arrived. That night, after the calls stopped and the texts dried up, I listened to voicemail after voicemail. My mother crying, then yelling, then bargaining. "You embarrassed us," she sobbed. "You've broken this family apart." But what really got me was the last message. Her voice was low, almost venomous. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've destroyed everything we built." That one made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly absurd. No, Mom, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending. I stopped covering for the dysfunction. I stopped shouldering the weight of their expectations while receiving none of their affection, for once. I left the mess exactly where it belonged on their side of the table. The following Monday, the movers came. I wasn't there to watch, but I got confirmation everything went smoothly. Their things were packed, labeled, and stored in a unit I paid for through the end of the month. I left them the key and a printed inventory. I changed the locks, updated the security system, and re-registered the utilities. I reclaimed every inch of my space, physically and emotionally. And then, silence. A profound, echoing silence that should have felt like a punishment, but instead felt like a blessing. But even silence doesn't last forever, and when it broke, it came in ways I didn't expect. First, it was Sister Lorraine from my mom's church. She called to say she just wanted to understand, as if spiritual authority gave her a pass to interrogate my personal boundaries. Then came Aunt Cheryl, showing up unannounced at my office, trying to guilt me into forgiving my parents, telling me Ethan was holding the family together in my absence. But when I asked if she remembered what my mother said at dinner, she blinked and offered the worst excuse I've ever heard. It was just a joke. Sweetie, right. Just like all the other times I was the punchline every ignored birthday, every forgotten accomplishment, every time I was reduced to Ethan's sister instead of my own person. It wasn't just one joke. It was the story of my life. And for the first time, I wasn't laughing. But the real reckoning hadn't come yet. That would arrive at my doorstep a few days later, in the form of someone I least expected, Ethan, and for the first time in our lives. He wasn't smiling. He looked like someone who had just realized the cost of being the favorite. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was halfway through baking a tray of brownies, Melissa's favorite, because we had plans later that evening to watch documentaries and decompress from a week neither of us wanted to talk about. My hands were dusted in flour. My kitchen filled with the scent of chocolate and lavender from the candles she left behind the night before. When I opened the door, I didn't expect to see him. Ethan stood there, worn down and rumpled in a way I had never seen him before. His button-up was wrinkled, collar slightly crooked, and his usual clean-shaven look had been replaced by a few days' worth of stubble. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him, not because his face had changed, but because the smugness was gone. I didn't invite him in. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Didn't expect to see you," I said. Not cold, but not warm either. He looked past me, into the apartment, like he was trying to find something familiar in a place he had never truly belonged. "You weren't answering," he replied. "Figured you wouldn't pick up. So this is a house call now." I raised an eyebrow. "You here to repeat Mom's talking points or add your own?" He didn't flinch, which surprised me. "I came," he said, "because I think I finally get it." And just like that, the rhythm of the moment shifted. I blinked. Get what he exhaled. Rubbed his face like he was still waking up from a long, ugly dream. What it's been like all these years. For you. I didn't want to believe it. Not really. But after the dinner, after everything, I saw it. Mom sobbing the next day. Not because she realized she hurt you, but because she was embarrassed. I asked her if she regretted it, and she said it was just a joke. That you should apologize. He laughed bitterly, and for the first time, I couldn't defend it. His voice wavered slightly, something rare for him. I started remembering all the little things, how she used to say I was the future of the family while you were literally doing their taxes in high school. How she never came to your plays, or recitals, or competitions, but made it to every game I sat on the bench for. I think he hesitated, searching for the right words. I liked being the favorite. It felt good, but I think I always knew it wasn't fair. For a long moment, I didn't respond. I just looked at him, at the boy who grew up being told he was the son, while I was treated like the gravity holding everything together but never noticed. For the first time, I saw him as something other than the favored son. I saw a man who had built his identity on praise and expectation, and was now questioning whether any of it had ever been real.
"You didn't deserve the toast," he said softly. "You didn't deserve any of it. And I'm sorry I didn't say something then, or before." His words weren't slick or polished like the Ethan I'd always known. They weren't performative. They just were. And maybe that's why I believed them. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. I didn't offer forgiveness because I wasn't ready. Instead, I said, "It's not me you need to say that to. It's yourself." He nodded slowly. "I don't expect things to be fixed. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to see it now." I stepped back, gently closed the door, not slamming it, not locking it, just closing it.
Later that night, Melissa and I sat on the couch with brownies in our laps, and true crime playing in the background. I told her what happened. She listened, nodded, and then said, "Maybe he's finally growing up." Then, smirking, she added, "Still not getting any brownies." Though, we both laughed, and it was real, the kind of laugh that sits low in your chest and vibrates something soft inside you. For the first time in years, I felt like the one worth showing up for. But peace has a way of drawing out old ghosts. A few days later, I came home from work, juggling a 2 full laptop bag and a lukewarm coffee, only to find my mother sitting on the front steps of my building, perfectly composed, like she was playing the part of a wronged matriarch in some sad family drama. She stood as I approached, hands folded over a handbag that probably cost more than my rent. "We need to talk," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "May I come in," just a command. And that, I realized, was all I needed to know. The years may have aged her, but the patterns, they hadn't changed at all. And with that, I walked past her and opened the door, not just to my building, but to the final act in a chapter I had spent my whole life rewriting from the margins. I didn't know it then, but what waited inside would finally bring every unspoken truth to the surface. She followed me inside without asking. The way she always had, like space belonged to her, unless told otherwise. My apartment was still warm from the sun, quiet in that peaceful way only a truly lived-in home can be. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air from Melissa's candles, and the pillows were still crumpled from our night on the couch. My mother sat down on the edge of my sofa like she was perched for a performance, smoothing the hem of her skirt, trying to control something, her appearance, the narrative. Maybe me.
"I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she began, voice calm but clipped. "And I think we both said things we didn't mean. I didn't sit. I stayed standing, arms crossed, watching her from a distance. What exactly did I say that wasn't true?" I asked. She blinked at that, caught slightly off guard. "You embarrassed the family," she replied, as if that were an answer. "You handed Ethan that letter like it was some kind of announcement. You didn't have to make a scene. There it was, the real wound. Not that I'd been hurt, overlooked, used, but that I dared to show it publicly. The crime wasn't the betrayal. It was the exposure." I tilted my head. "Do you even remember what you said at that dinner?" She hesitated, glanced away. "I made a toast, a joke. Everyone laughed." "Exactly," I said, "because they've all been taught I'm the joke." Her eyes flickered, for the first time. She looked unsure. So I continued. "You turned my home into a vacation house, changed the locks, told people I offered it out of gratitude. You treated it and me like a resource. And the moment I stopped being convenient, you got cold." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a split second, there was nothing, no defense, no denial, just silence. "We needed help," she finally whispered. "So did I." I said evenly, "But you never asked what I needed." That made her flinch. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because it was the first time I had said it without begging to be heard. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't know how to raise a daughter like you," she said after a long pause. "What does that mean?" I asked. "You were so independent. You didn't need much. Ethan, he needed more. He was softer." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, Mom, I needed just as much. I just learned to stop asking." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The silence between us said it all, after 20 minutes of tight-lipped pleasantries and half-formed regrets. She stood up. "I'll be in touch," she said. No hug, no apology, just a quiet exit, the same way she'd exited every meaningful moment of my life, half present, half aware, completely certain she hadn't done anything truly wrong.
But something had changed. Not in her, but in me. I didn't follow her out. I didn't cry after the door shut. I didn't even sigh. I sat down on my couch, and looked around the room that belonged entirely to me. It still smelled like lavender. The light filtered in through the blinds. And for the first time, I realized that she could come into my space, but she couldn't own it. Not anymore. 3 months passed after the dinner. No calls, no messages, no family gatherings. Thanksgiving came and went without a text. No Christmas card, no New Year's hope you're doing well. And yet, I wasn't aching for it. I wasn't angry. I was calm. Then came Grandma's 80th birthday. The only person who had ever truly seen me not as a comparison, but as a person. When she called and said, "Honey, I don't care who's mad at who, you better show up, or I'll fake my death just to guilt you." I couldn't help but laugh. I went, new haircut, new outfit, new energy. I walked into the reunion with my head high. Whispers rose like wind in the grass. People stared. Some turned away. My mother froze mid-conversation. My father glanced up and quickly looked down. Ethan gave me a small nod before disappearing into another room. But none of it pierced me. I spent the day with Melissa, Aunt Leia, and cousins who admitted quietly that they'd seen it all, but assumed I was okay with it. They hadn't known how deep it ran. That night, before I left, Grandma pulled me aside. She touched my hand gently and said, "You look like you're finally free. I know it cost you, baby, but freedom always does." I hugged her tightly, knowing it would be the last time I'd see any of them. A month later, Ethan moved out of the rental. Rumor has it, he's staying with a friend. My parents, last I heard, they're trying to qualify for a mortgage without me. As for me, I got promoted again. I joined a book club. Melissa and I are planning a vacation to somewhere warm. Somewhere no one calls me Ethan's sister or tells me I'm too sensitive. And if that sounds selfish, then maybe it is. But I've learned something vital sometimes. The most radical act of love is finally loving yourself more than the people who only valued your usefulness. For the first time in my life, I'm not surviving inside someone else's version of family. I'm building my own definition, one where I am not invisible, one where I matter, one where the quiet isn't lonely, it's finally mine.